So yeah, mull on these for a moment, and then would love, those who feel compelled to share would love to get to know you all a little bit.
Hi, I can start actually.
I love it. Thank
Um,
you, Grace. Yeah.
yeah, sorry my screen's off, but my name is Grace. I use she, her pronouns, and what brings me here today is that I'm a graduate student at Stanford in the environmental communication program,
Mm.
and I'm also an artist. I'm a performing artist.
Oh, so
And
cool.
something that I'm working on right now, I'm 23 years old, by the way. And something that's really bothered me is like the question of, do I have a kid? Um, and right now I'm working on this project that it's very, young in its infancy, but I'm collecting interviews from parents of like children who were born around 2010,
Mm.
um, or grandparents of those children, anybody who like wants to talk about that. So I guess this is also a self plug. I'll put my email in the
Yeah.
chat if anyone wants to be interviewed, but that is what brings me here today. And I think my big fear is just like actually less about how to talk to children about climate change and like the ethics and like the question for me of whether or not I bring a child into this world.
Wow. I mean, that's so incredibly deep. And yeah, again, I feel like, I'm certainly on a learning journey here as far as engaging with these issues. And the project that you're undertaking sounds really incredible. So again, I appreciate you bringing that up, and absolutely would love to have you share your contact information or project. Definitely an important related topic here. I know we won't have time to get to everybody, probably. That'll take up the whole hours. Anybody else feel called to kind of share what brings them here today?
I can share.
Yeah.
Um, my name is Mia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a rabbi in New York City, but my rabbinate is as a correctional chaplain.
Mhm.
Um, I have two kids, both very concerned about the environment, and so I think what brought me here was especially my older child, who is 8, uh, goes through sort of fixations on the environment, and I want to continue to impress upon them the urgency of the situation without having them feel personally responsible or feel hopeless because it's really corporations and not individuals that are causing the most damage. So I would love to just see what people are doing about it, and uh, and so yeah.
Gotcha. I missed just the last part of what you said. I caught it at just not wanting
Oh
to. Your kids were over.
yeah,
Yeah.
there
Oh, it's a little choppy.
that I mean, I have Jewish sources just from being a rabbi and reading lots of texts, but I'd love to also be able to create the connection for kids about Judaism and the environment and how that can help be a constructive force in giving them a
Mm,
balanced and caring way of viewing the environment and themselves.
awesome. Well, and again, I'm excited to dive in. Forgive me, I was should have known that something technical would come up, but I do hope that we can feature more voices as we go here. And again, even just hearing from a couple of you, I'm really appreciating that the different forms of expertise that are in this space. And again, I enter into this. I don't feel like I have all the answers here. I'm going to offer some ideas and some frameworks today, as well as some resources. But absolutely, again, if there are things that come up for you, ideas that you have, I want you to share them as well. Um, so thank you to those who were able to share. We'll kind of keep cruising, and again, I hope that we can feature some more voices. A bit about me and what brings me here today. I'm a dad. An educator and an author. And essentially, 6 years ago, wrestling with some of the questions that have already come up, I sat down to write a children's book about climate change called Fur and Feathers Stand Together. And this was really sort of my answer to the question, like, what can I do that leverages, skills that I have and passions that I have. And really, I hoped that, a children's book could be a jumping off point for, again, introducing this topic in a way that wouldn't kind of overwhelm or scare kids. Um, and, ultimately, the reason I'm here today, as people have referred to as, these two monkeys, these are my kids, Sophia and Lila. Um, and, along similar lines, I really hope that as urgent as these issues are, there's a way that I can still empower them to feel like they can make a difference. And also, like, I still want to make, Mickey Mouse pancakes. I want to feel like we can still be in a world where the things that I grew up with, they get to have access to as we all work on these very urgent and pressing issues. The other thing that brings me here today, and I just got to give, quick gratitude to all the groups that have kind of guided me in the process. When I was writing this book, I connected with folks from the International Indigenous Youth Council, Center for Biological Diversity, and Sunrise Movement, who really helped inform a lot of my thinking. And then more recently, I read the book All We Can Save, which is a collection of essays and poems, primarily from female-identified authors. And really powerful, just really has shaped the way that I've thought about these sort of interconnected and overlapping issues of climate change. One among many resources, but just wanted to name that some of what I'll be talking about today comes from these folks. And so this is my crack at summarizing climate change in a sentence. This comes from a spread in the book. Across the world, the stories changed, but one truth flowed like water. As human beings kept taking more, the earth kept getting hotter. For me, it was trying to get at this idea that climate change looks like a lot of different things, but it's fundamentally connected to human actions. And I always feel like global warming is a little bit of it sounds kind of nice, ooh, getting warmer, but it's really not a nice thing. And so emphasizing that the earth is getting hotter, there is this urgency to it. But again, there's no right way. This by no means captures every element of climate change. And what I want to kind of lead off with talking about is stuff that I've already kind of heard referred to, like, why is it hard to talk with kids about climate change? And I just want to name, some people have already mentioned this, right? It's really scary. And I think as you think about how to talk with kids about climate change, we have to think about where they are in their development. And furthermore, I think we have to make sure we're processing it for ourselves. Before you have a conversation with kids about climate, make sure that you're not passing on any of your own process, any of your own anxiety to your kids. That's what this space is for. That's what having groups and communities is for. So make sure you're processing your own engagement with climate change. Another thing developmentally, I just want to flag to be aware of, right, is that especially young kids tend to personalize things, feeling like, oh, this is my fault, or, oh, I don't want that to happen directly to me. And so I think as this conversation unfolds, it's really important, and we'll talk more about this, but to be listening, keeping an eye out for the cues from your children that they may be going down that path, because I don't think that's a space we want them to get into. Another reason I think it's super hard to talk about climate change is it's just super complex. Like, where do we start? Do we just jump right in and talk about CO2 and the climate cycle, the water cycle? Or do we talk about, the things that overlap with it, how it reinforces environmental racism? Do we just focus on animals, or do we talk about humans? Do we talk about the systems of capitalism and extraction that drive it? What I want to highlight here is there's so many different roads to talk about climate change. I don't think there's a right way to start it. But I also think as we move forward in that conversation with kids, that we are prepared to talk about the things that it overlaps with. Again, we don't have to dive right in with some of these things, but we need to be prepared to not whitewash the issue as kids engage with it more. So as I like to do when I get partway through Fur and Feather, there's a moment in the book where the whole world paused, and I invite all the kids that I'm reading to just take a deep breath. So I just wanted to invite everybody who's here to just join me in taking a quick breath. Here we go. I want that breath to just be an experiential reminder that before you embark on this climate conversation with kids, I think there's actually things to do before the conversation that are as, if not more important. We want to take a breath. And these are some things I want to put out there for you to think about. Before you have this conversation, what do you have to learn about? What more is there about climate that you want to explore? Maybe some of the things I've already mentioned, are things that you feel like you're less familiar with, that you could become better acquainted with. What can we learn? Second, listening, right? Before we just launch into this conversation with our kids, what do they already know? Lead with questions. What have they heard in school? What have they heard from their friends? What have they seen on your phone when you didn't realize they were on your phone? And furthermore, like, what do they already love? What are they already excited about, passionate about? That maybe is that inroads to talking about climate change. You don't have to jump right into climate change. Maybe you can come at it from something they're already interested in or want to protect and save. And last but not least, I just needed a third L here, and love is always a word that never hurts to have. But how can we cultivate a love for the world before we jump in with this conversation? Again, as I mentioned in that other slide, it's such a scary topic. Before we get into the brokenness, how can you cultivate a sense of love and connection with nature and the world? So I think an important part of this conversation is, before we jump into it, I think there's work to be done, things we can do to set that conversation up for success. And so what I'd like to do is, I see some people have, a pen and paper. If you don't, I encourage you to grab a pen and paper. We'll take a couple of minutes here. And I'll actually, I'll play a little music to facilitate this. Would love to have you guys reflect on these questions for yourself and maybe jot down some notes. What do you feel like you need to learn more about regarding climate change? What is something a child loves that you could connect to climate in some way? And how have you or can you foster a connection with nature for kids? How can we get them outside connecting with nature, etc.? So we'll take maybe like 2 or 3 minutes, reflect on those questions. Brought the guitar here. We'll check back in. I'd love to hear what people have to say. And feel free, if it's easier for you to kind of turn off your camera, if you want to, that helps you, focus in, feel free to do that. right. Music is also a great way to smooth the conversation with kids. Maybe we can write a song to explain it. Would anybody like to share things that came up for them as they were reflecting on, some of these possibilities?
I'll say something because
Yeah.
I have my, first of all, I have everything to learn. It's not what I have to learn. I don't even know what I have to learn because climate change has not been an area on which I've focused. I'm retired now, and
Mm.
I'm looking to fill my life with meaning.
Mm.
Um, and I have, thank God, 7 grandchildren. They're all different and living in different places. So I'm looking for ways to connect with all of them. But I did think about what I can do, and I've done some of it. I think taking walks. Unfortunately, I don't live near any of them at the moment. But when I was visiting in Southern California recently, I would take my kids on walks, even in the neighborhood, and just pick up pine cones or
Mm.
different shapes of leaves, and we'd fill the stroller basket with all of these different types of objects. I didn't get to the point where I made art from them, but it's one, they were so excited. I hear from my daughter, they're still collecting when they go out.
Mm.
And other things, I mean, taking hikes and going to the aquarium or botanical gardens or zoos, and
Mm.
taking conversation from there. I mean, eventually I'd love to take them away on a big trip to some beautiful place, but the little trips are very exciting for them, and I call them let's go on an adventure. And so
Yeah.
I found that to be thrilling for me and them.
And I just really appreciate you mentioning, right? It's like it doesn't have to be a big trip necessarily. Just these little moments, picking up a pine cone together. I know these things sound really simple, but again, that basic triggering of interest and love is such an important precursor to this conversation. So I really appreciate you mentioning those specifics. And I will share some resources as far as learning more. Again, the good news is there's no shortage of stuff out there. And I think part of it is just poring over it for yourself and figuring out. We'll actually be looking at a video shortly that talks about climate change. And it's one among many that you can find out there. I see a couple other hands raised. If you raise your hand digitally on Zoom, just go for it. Feel free to unmute yourself. And I trust us to make that happen. Yeah, if you're waving your hand, go for it.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ellen, and I live on traditional Massachusetts land in Massachusetts. So for me, I really like doing the connection between how we grow our food, how we take care of our yards in suburbia, and climate change, and also pesticides comes in there. So we've been working on a pollinator protection project.
Mm.
And I actually got very inspired to write a children's book. I'm also a storyteller. And so I was thinking it'd be really fun to have kids, like if we had butterflies in our neighborhood, a lot of neighbors use pesticides, to try to pretend to follow from clump of flower to clump of flower to clump of flower, like what it might be like for a butterfly or a bee to do that. And like if they have a vegetable garden, like which vegetables in the garden would have flowers, and why they would want to go back and forth, and that kind of thing. And if they do see a butterfly or a ladybug or something like that, to get all excited about it and tell stories about it.
I love it. And part of what I hear you saying too is like getting kids to put themselves in the shoes of another being. Um, yeah, it's, I think, I mean, as a storyteller, right? Such a wonderful thing. And it's like, as you're speaking, I see kids kind of outside, like, pretending to be animals and following along. Like, again, as we're having this conversation, I imagine a lot of us came here because it feels like a scary conversation to have. But man, kids are awesome, right? And let's start with this love. Let's start with the fun that can then lead into this conversation. Here, I see so many hands raised, and I want to, oh man, like an hour feels too short. I think maybe let's do one more person. And then if you want, maybe share in the chat, if you aren't having a chance to share out loud, if you want to share some of your thoughts here absolutely feel free to type out some of what you're thinking in the chat. So if one other person wants to dive in and share their reflections, I'd love that.
I'll dive in. My name is Marion. I'm a Jewish educator, Montessori teacher, and a gardener. And I do a lot of gardening with young people. I actually run the garden at my synagogue. And we do a lot of, I mean, pre-COVID, well, we actually worked in the garden during the pandemic, which was really nice. And so we'll get back to that. And so growing your own food, eating from the garden, growing fruiting shrubs and fruiting trees, eating, like learning about native species, I think is a really, really wonderful thing to learn about what actually was growing here before, you know, invasives. There's a lot of wonderful native fruiting trees that I think are really fun for young people. Also really, really wonderful project that I was about to embark in with Extinction Rebellion. We were going to do it was in Western Massachusetts, and we were going to do a big puppet parade of all our favorite animals, you know, and they could be near extinction or not extinct. And so doing like a big puppet parade as part of a big climate change, so, you know, kind of climate change, you know, march, or in a celebration of our earth. So those are just some thoughts that I have.
Well, and what's coming up for me as you're speaking, Marion, is like, I mean, again, we've all highlighted some different ideas here, but as I hear each of you speaking, like I hear you channeling a passion or love that you have. And again, just want to highlight that part of having this conversation is how, not just what we're saying, but how we're having it, right? And if you're coming into this conversation with a sense of love and hope, again, kids pick up on so much more than the words we're saying. And so I just want to, you know, pull that out as something to reflect on about having this conversation, is channeling your own loves and passions into it, I think is really important to come back to. I want to keep cruising. We've got some other things to reflect on. I love seeing the hands raised. I'm sorry we can't get to everybody, but again, really encourage you to put in the chat if you want to share with others. So I did want to kind of just quickly watch a video together. You know, I want to pivot now to talking about, like, you know, actually having the conversation with kids. I want to share one video and just kind of, you know, hear people's thoughts on it. This is by no means a perfect video. So I'm just interested to hear what comes up for people as they check it out. This is from a really cool resource called Earth School, which was put together by TED. And it's the result of a collaboration of like a ton of different organizations. Everybody can see it? Thumbs up? Okay, here we go. Gotta get past the ad. Oh man, it doesn't even let me skip. 10 seconds. Internet is just dishing it all out on me today. Okay, here we go.
To understand climate change, think of the game Tetris. For eons, Earth has played a version of this game with blocks of carbon. They enter the atmosphere as carbon dioxide gas from volcanoes, decaying plant matter, breathing creatures, and the surface of the sea. And they leave the atmosphere when they're used by plants during photosynthesis, absorbed back into the ocean, or stored in soil and sediment. This game of Tetris is called the carbon cycle, and it's the engine of life on Earth. What's the connection to climate? Well, when that carbon dioxide is in the air waiting to be reabsorbed, it traps a portion of the sun's heat which would otherwise escape to space. That's why carbon dioxide is called a greenhouse gas. It creates a blanket of warmth known as the greenhouse effect that keeps our Earth from freezing like Mars. The more carbon dioxide blocks hang out in the atmosphere waiting to be cleared, the warmer Earth becomes. Though the amount of carbon in the atmosphere has varied through ice ages and asteroid impacts, over the past 8,000 years, the stable climate we know took shape, allowing human civilization to thrive. But about 200 years ago, we began digging up that old carbon that had been stored in the soil. These fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, are made from the buried remains of plants and animals that died long before humans evolved. The energy stored inside them was able to power our factories, cars, and power plants. But burning these fuels also injected new carbon blocks into Earth's Tetris game. At the same time, we cleared forests for agriculture, reducing the Earth's ability to remove the blocks. And since 1750, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere has increased by 40% and shows no sign of slowing. Just like in Tetris, the more blocks pile up, the harder it becomes to restore stability. The extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere accelerates the greenhouse effect by trapping more heat near the surface and causing polar ice caps to melt. And the more they melt, the less sunlight they're able to reflect, making the oceans warm even faster. Sea levels rise, coastal populations are threatened with flooding, natural ecosystems are disrupted, and the weather becomes more extreme over time. Climate change may affect different people and places in different ways, but ultimately it's a game that we're all stuck playing. And unlike in Tetris, we won't get a chance to start over and try again.
So that was a video that I found relatively recently. Again, it's part of a really fantastic resource called Earth School that I definitely will include a link to. I think it's pretty awesome. But what do you folks think? What do you like about that? Maybe what do we not like about that? How would it be useful to you or not?
I don't want to take up too much, so if somebody else wants to talk, fine. I just want you to know, for me, as I said, this is a very beginning of my building my education on this, so I thought it was really simple and easy to understand. I've heard about carbon neutral, and I didn't really understand that. I mean, so this I think is excellent. The only thing in this that I thought was a jump was how it affects weather, because it wasn't a natural step. So I'd like to understand more. I know there, the storms are greater, and I'd like the same thing with a little more education about weather, but I want to show this to my kids and grandkids.
What about, other thoughts? And feel free to jump in and unmute
yourself. I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Shoshana. I also dropped a link in the chat. I'm leading what actually will be a great follow-up session to this tomorrow, and would love to see you there. I'm talking to very young children about climate change, and it's connected to the comment I want to make about the video, which is for me, in the work that I've been doing internally as well as an external activist, climate change is a really emotional issue. And the big concern I have about this video is that anytime we're talking with children, and I was one of the kids who I actually consider myself pretty much a victim of the 80s and 90s rhetoric of reduce, reuse, recycle, you can save the earth. And there's a great link I'll drop after my comment that you can, to a comic about that, but how damaging that kind of simplistic language can be for children. Since it's not true, and then we think that we can save the earth if only we're perfect. And so the one concern that I have about a video like this is that I would want it to be immediately followed by information about the movement, and information potentially specifically from Sunrise, but not that it would not be followed in my hope, but that it would not be followed with information about what a child can do personally in their own lives. But that it would actually be followed with how a child can plug into the greater movement, because that for me is where the spiritual resilience starts to come in, and where this is a big adventure humanity's on and I get to be part of it, as opposed to a private, terrifying thing that every single choice I make in my life is impacting. So when we only look at the science, I really worry about what that ends up doing to the souls, to the private fears of the kids as well as us.
And I love what you're bringing up, Shoshana. Is Shoshana?
Yes.
Again, it's like, I feel similarly. I mean, like, this is similar to a lot of videos that I find that do kind of jump in with the science. And again, I agree with you. I think, what I want to flag for everybody is, as you look through these resources for yourself, there's kind of two thoughts I have. One is, you don't have to show a whole video, right? I think there's parts of this, like when I saw the asteroid hit the Earth, I was like, ooh, yeah, I don't want my kid to see that. Like, that would be really upsetting, you know? And I think as a kid, I'd be freaking out, like, oh my gosh, is that going to happen? Right? There's certain, like, there's little things that kids seize on, and, you know, monitor it. You don't have to show everything depending on how old they are and how much they already know. And then similar to what Shoshana said, right? I think it's so complicated, right? And like this video doesn't capture all of it. You know, it doesn't capture like, is it Aqua? I had mentioned, right, like it doesn't cover clearly the connection between weather and all those things. So there may be follow-ups to do. So again, what I want to encourage you is to check out the stuff that's out there, and you can pick and choose, stitch it together in the way that works for you. I also really just want to reflect back, Shoshana, what you were saying about like shifting from the individual to the collective is actually something I want to explore a little bit more in the end of this presentation, because I think that's a really key theme that we want to convey to kids. So again, just wanted to share, like, this is one among many. These are some other things that I think are, again, great things to pick and choose from. Earth School, like I mentioned, Alliance for Climate Education. Again, I'll follow up with links to all of these. That's probably more for like middle to high school kids, but you could certainly, again, kind of pick and choose elements of the videos they have. They really walk through like what causes climate change, what does it look like, what are stories from people around the planet, some really cool stuff there. And I just inserted this link, A Parent's Guide to Climate Revolution, 100 Ways to Build a Fossil-Free Future. So if you're feeling like I feel like people who are here have already shared some awesome ideas, from growing fruit trees to other things. But if you're looking for ideas, you know, there's tons of books that can tell you how to take action on these things with kids. And so what I want to wrap up with, we've got about 17 minutes. I'll do my very best to cram this in. I wish now that we could have 2 hours, because I feel like even just hearing from a couple of you, I'm like, man, everybody here is so awesome. I wanted to just kind of throw out a few possibilities for themes, things that kind of interweave with climate change, that may be connection points for kids and sort of instilling values and actions. So the themes that I've outlined are greed, injustice, disconnection. These are things that when I was exploring, you know, writing a children's book, things that seemed intimately connected with climate change. And I think for each of these themes, you know, there's opportunities to teach things that we want kids to learn about and engage with. Generosity and sharing, social justice and anti-racism, and reconnection with people on the planet. Some of these things I feel like we've already touched on. So I'm going to walk through these kind of quickly, just some thoughts that I've had along these lines, again, just as offerings for all of you. By no means is this comprehensive though, right? To touch on first, greed. You know, I think, again, this is something that I think kids can really latch onto, because, you know, so much of early development is about sharing and taking turns, right? And for me, a big part of the story of climate change is human beings are taking too much. We are taking too much from the earth, and we're not sharing things amongst each other in a way that is fair. So I think just that basic idea that greed is underneath some of the climate changing is something even really young kids can understand. And then as kids get older, we can, you know, make that more complex, right? It's not that everybody's sort of equally responsible for this. We can introduce kids to the idea that, you know, there are certain groups, people have already mentioned, right, that corporations, fossil fuel companies have an outsized role to play in this. And then as they get older, you know, and start to understand systems, you can start to dive into this concept of, you know, capitalism, the larger sort of extractive nature of the way our overall system works and how it kind of objectifies the earth and resources, and getting kids to think about that and grapple with it. And so as far as the flip side of that, right, if those are things that we are kind of teaching as things we want to, you know, are underlying climate change and we want to work back against, there's tons of connections and I think actions one can take. You know, obviously on the micro level, teaching our kids to share effectively and finding ways to connect that to, you know, climate activism, I think is cool. But tzedakah, as a Jewish concept, the idea that we're going to be giving a portion of what we have. I think that's a real opportunity to, again, just frame that in terms of climate and working against the sort of hoarding or greed mentality. You can even, with tzedakah, potentially consider, where you're giving that money. Maybe it's to organizations that are working on climate change, or maybe it's to groups that have already been impacted by it. And so again, it in that sense could become a springboard for conversation with kids. Baal Tashit, this idea that not only do we want to not take more than we need, but let's not destroy or waste the things that we have. So instilling those values in kids, and again, making a connection to a Jewish value. Shoshana brought up reduce, reuse, recycle. I think, those are certainly things we want to instill in our kids, but I really appreciate you flagging, not making it a wholly individualistic endeavor is really important. And again, some other ideas here, right? For older kids, getting them to write letters, if they care about these things, write letters to those corporations or those political leaders who are making decisions to value profits over people. Investigating where your money is. Again, that's something we sometimes, I shouldn't say we, because I don't want to, paint with a broad brush, but I know for me, money is an uncomfortable topic. And bring your kids into that conversation. Where is our money going? Where's our money in the bank? Where's our money in our 401k? Where do we think it should be going? Get them involved in that decision-making is an interesting way to, I think, make a connection here. And ultimately, less is more. Maybe as a family committing to this idea of like meatless Mondays, finding ways to concretely reduce consumption. And again, using that as potentially a platform to make the connection to climate. So that's one set of ideas. I'm going to kind of blast through these, and again, then want to just open up the floor to hear people's reflections. Another intersecting point here is injustice. Again, I think a core thing that kids can latch onto, even at a very young age, is the idea of fairness. And ultimately, right, climate change is underscoring and exacerbating existing divisions in society that often are linked to race and class, and in the case of climate as well, are also, of course, regionally linked. So introducing the idea to kids early on that climate does impact people differently, I think is an important tie-in to make. Somebody that I want to flag is like a really great resource to learn more about this. There's an Oakland artist named Fabiana Rodriguez who talks a lot about the links between climate change and white supremacy, the links between climate change and capitalism. And I think for kids, again, there's some research that I'll share on the next page. That's another really important conversation to be starting with kids, conversing about race. And I think it's important, as you have that climate conversation, to be ready to highlight how it is connected to those pre-existing societal problems. In particular, too, I want to flag that I think there's an opportunity here to engage with kids about indigenous history and oppression. I'm a huge fan of Greta Thunberg. I'm not sure if everybody knows who she is, right? But she's the young girl from, I think it's Sweden. I should know this off the top of my head, but started Fridays for Our Future, these protests where schools are on strike. She's awesome. But I think, right, as the face of the climate movement, she's a young white girl, and there's people of color, indigenous people who have been, fighting these fights for a long time. And so I think bringing that into the conversation as kids learn about indigenous people in school, making sure that that's not, a conversation that's in the past tense, but, really in the present. And so these are some resources. Again, these books aren't necessarily about climate change, but as you look to have that component of the conversation with the kids, these are some great resources that I think can help provide language for that piece of the puzzle. A is for Activists actually does. I think E, it's an alphabet book. E talks about environmental justice. So there are explicit sort of tie-ins and connections you can make. And We Are Water Protectors is a really beautiful book that is based on, in large part, the Standing Rock protests that happened. So a great way to, again, kind of center Indigenous peoples in the narrative around climate change and those who are, again, collectively working against it. Right? That whole book is we are water protectors, not I am a water protector. And some actions I wanted to consider. Actually, somebody already kind of modeled this for us. There's the idea of the land acknowledgements. I can insert a link into resources, but there's a website called nativeland.ca where you can actually find out what Native peoples in America, I think it's mostly America, were the traditional and are the traditional caretakers of the land you live on. And I think, that's something that more and more people are investigating doing in meetings and, it's sort of regular occurrences. And I think Shabbat is an incredible time that you could consider folding that in as like a regular practice. Let's get mindful about the land that we're on and who has traditionally taken care of it. And again, to Shoshana's point, you're up in the left of my screen, Shoshana, so I keep seeing you. Again, this is something we shouldn't be doing alone. Surge is a group that I've connected with, showing up for racial justice, and they have a youth and families component that can connect folks with a lot of great events, resources specifically for kids along these lines. I'm blasting through a little quick. I got one more, and then I want to open it up to discussion. Last piece that I want to flag is like a potential inroads for conversation with kids that I've heard people touch on is disconnection. And this was kind of central to the thesis of, Fur and Feather. I think so much for me when I ask the question of why are we in this, mess, is a disconnection from the earth, a disconnection from each other, and a spiritual disconnection. If we really experienced ourselves, not just like understood that we're connected and there's a web of life, but like actually experienced that, I think kids already have almost that magical sense, right, of things being connected. And if we can nurture that and maintain that, I think that in of itself is a huge part of this puzzle. And so some ideas along those lines. One of my, I guess the Jewish traditions that I just love reflecting on is the idea of the mezuzah, this idea that we have something we put in our homes that's a constant reminder of, our connection to God. Aqua was talking about pine cones and bringing things back from nature. Make a nature mezuzah with your kids, something that they can put up, and when they walk by it, is there as an intentional reminder, I am connected to that place I was, even when I'm in my house, breaking down that nature humanity duality. Build connections, even just getting to know your neighbors. Again, whether you've had the climate conversation and want to take action by building community, or want to start building community as a means to, have the conversation about climate. When we lived in an apartment in El Cerrito, my daughter Sophia was just always pushing us to like bake cookies and bring them to our neighbors. These things, I think, again, they can just be isolated acts, but they can be a part of this larger conversation that connects to climate change. And last but not least, kindness. When my illustrator and I created our book, we put out a kindness challenge where if you do one act of kindness for a person and one act of kindness for a plant or animal, we'll send a free digital copy of the book. And for me, when I sort of thought about like, how can I instigate connection? Kindness is such a beautiful way for kids to do that and experience either directly, that act of kindness, or to sort of learn like, hey, I do an act of kindness. I may not get, an immediate response, but starting to sense that they're a part of a reciprocal loop when they do these things. Last piece of the puzzle, we've got like 4 minutes. Oh my gosh, an hour flies by. Just really want to emphasize again to not situate this work against individuality. There are so many groups that are working on this, and get kids connected with them. There was a resource that I sent before this talk where a mom and a daughter were talking about going to protests together. that can be a great way to start the conversation, right? Like, why are we here? Well, let me tell you, there's, all these people that are working together who love the planet and want to do something about it. So those are just some ideas. Oh, here comes my little one. I knew this would happen at some point. I got to wrap up just the last couple of minutes because people have tuned in. This is Sophia.
We might need a little help when you're done, okay?
Okay, sounds great.
Can you just stay here for right now?
I'm going to stay here for right now. So given that we have about 3 minutes, I knew this would happen. I knew we'd run out of time. I think what I want to jump to, last thing I want to leave you with, and then I have 3 things to kind of commit to. I will read it out loud for you. I love you. Is I want to land on this slide from the book. For Penny, Nook, and CQ2, their work had just begun, and key to changing hearts and minds was having lots of fun. If you can end your climate conversation on the word fun, that's one of the beautiful things about these monkeys is you're so good at having fun. You're good at having fun, right?
We always play together on sunny days.
We always play together on sunny days. And it's right, if we can harness that energy and be open to our kids and what their ideas are, I think that's such a key part of this conversation. So really, it's a scary conversation, but if we can land on fun, right? Have we talked about climate change? Have we had fun doing it? Fantastic. That's what I want to leave you with, is hopefully landing on that note, that uplifting tone. 2 minutes left. I would love to kind of open it up here. These are some questions that I would love for you guys to explore as we look ahead. And if you have some answers to these questions here, I'm going to send out a survey to everybody because I would love to get your feedback and really encourage you, if there are things that you didn't have a chance to share today, share them with me and I'd love to share them with the group. In our closing 2 minutes, enough of me yapping. Does anybody have closing thoughts or reflections coming out of today that they'd love to share?
I do. I'd love to share. Hi, I'm Bamaya. I'm also out in California too, and I'm school librarian, so came looking for resources and things. I really loved your infectious love for kids and the environment, and it just really was so moving. What I would say is that I really liked was the idea of plugging into what the kids are already interested in and using that as a jumping off point. Like for my daughter, it's art. So somebody had mentioned nature walks and making art with those objects. I love that idea. But also you mentioned about neighbors. And I think for some people that might seem like, oh, how is that connected? But it so is, like doing the cookie thing that your daughter recommended, like that has really been
but somebody's talking, sorry.
Honey making cookies, and we do that at my house too. And
we made it together to the 2 of us and we put sprinkles and decorations down.
Oh, I bet your neighbors really loved that, didn't they? Our neighbors did too.
Cookies.
We celebrate both in our house.
We do too, honey. We celebrate both holidays and we take cookies, and now that's allowed us to be able to look out for neighbors during COVID because that connection was already built. You know, usually it was at the point where, in California, you only go into your garage, you never see your neighbors really, even on a small cul-de-sac of just 6 homes, but just that reaching out allowed us to say, hey, are you okay on toilet paper? Are you okay on this connection? Now we're all looking out for each other. It's a community, not just houses where no one knows each other. And I think doing that and working on lawns together and ways that we can make it more beautiful, but also environmentally friendly for the animals and critters and bugs. I love that. So thank you for bringing that up. And thank you to your daughter for coming to visit us today.
Oh, totally. Well, what I'll say is I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know there's a lot of other great things going on at the Climate Fest today. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit longer if other folks wanted to debrief. I've got at least a little bit more time here. I can keep the Zoom open, but if you got to go, no worries. But definitely happy to reflect for a little longer if folks want to stick around. I'd be interested to hear your feedback because again, I'm in a process of learning as well here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
if you haven't checked out Dayenu yet, I really encourage you to. It's the new climate organizing, Jewish climate organization that is a great way to build
Just
power.
had our first meeting Monday night.
Fabulous.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Thanks
awesome.
so much for the session.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Share those resources.
Yeah, they're in the chat.
Fantastic.
Everything.
Share everything. See? It's working.
Hi.
Oh, she sees grandma and grandpa. There we go. All
Hi,
right,
Bubby and Papa.
all right, I'm gonna pull the chat, but yeah, again, if folks want to stick around, I'll be here for another few minutes.
I miss you, Bubby and Papa, and I really
We
miss you.
we miss you too, honey. We miss you
I wish I
too.
could see you, but well, I'll come see you soon.
That would
Okay.
be wonderful.
Yeah,
That would be great.
Daddy did a good job talking
Maybe I
about
should stop
climate
recording
change
now.
today.
I think I'll stop recording now.
Yeah, good idea.